Ryan Blake thought he had left the past behind, until he saw two hungry children in a grocery store, and one of them was wearing a necklace he gave to the woman he never stopped loving. Ryan Blake lived a life most people only saw through glass. From the outside, it was polished and precise: penthouse apartment overlooking the skyline, luxury cars tucked in underground garages, an executive office lined with black marble and silence. His schedule was managed to the minute, his suits tailored to perfection, and his emotions locked behind a wall even he had stopped noticing. He had built his world around success, control, and distance. Relationships, vulnerability, softness, those had been buried long ago, when he chose power over anything messy or unpredictable. That choice had cost him love once, but he had convinced himself that it was necessary. That letting her go was part of becoming the man he needed to be. He had no reason to question it. His company was booming, his face appeared in magazines, and his inbox overflowed with opportunity. He had everything. And yet, on a cool Tuesday evening, everything he thought he knew unraveled in the most unexpected way. He had stopped at a grocery store on his way home from a board meeting. Something simple: bottled water, maybe coffee. He walked the aisles with mechanical focus, barely registering the people around him. But then, as he turned down the canned goods aisle, he saw two children standing quietly near a display of granola bars. A boy and a girl, no older than 6. They didn't speak. They weren't touching anything. They were just watching the shelves with careful eyes, standing very still, as if afraid to be noticed. Something about them made him slow down. The girl had long wavy brown hair and bright blue eyes that seemed too heavy for someone so small. The boy stood close beside her, a near mirror, same eyes, same hair, the kind of closeness only twins seem to share. They were both thin, their clothes slightly wrinkled but clean. At first, Ryan assumed a parent must be nearby. But when a minute passed and no one came, a strange tightness formed in his chest. He took a cautious step closer and saw it, just a flash beneath the girl's collar. A silver necklace, a small heart pendant. But not a full heart, half of one. His own breath caught in his throat. He knew that necklace. He had given the other half to Lily. It had been years since he saw her, since he left her. He remembered the day in painful detail, the look in her eyes when he told her he wasn't ready for family, that he had to put his work first. She had stood silently, not begging, not angry, just accepting. And then she had walked away. He had never followed. Never called. He thought she had moved on, started over. He never imagined she had kept that pendant. Never imagined she might have had children, his children. He didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the pull in his gut was impossible to ignore. He knelt beside the children, not too close, and asked softly, "Are you two okay? Is your mom nearby?" The boy looked at him with caution but didn't move. The girl answered, her voice steady but small. "She's at the hospital. She got sick. We walked here because we were hungry." Ryan felt his entire body go still. "You walked here? Alone?" The boy nodded. "It's close. She said to stay inside, but she was sleeping a long time." "Did someone bring you to the hospital?" "No," the girl said. "She drove us last night, but then they took her. They didn't let us stay." Ryan stood up slowly, his thoughts spinning. These children had been left to figure out survival on their own. In a city this size. At night. And their mother, could it really be her? He made a decision without thinking. He picked up a basket, invited them to follow, and filled it with food. Apples, sandwiches, juice. He watched them hesitate before accepting anything, as if even kindness might disappear if they reached too quickly. When they sat on the bench near the exit, eating quietly, he crouched again beside them. "What's your mom's name?" he asked. The girl looked up at him, a bit of hope flickering behind her guarded gaze. "Lily," she said. "Lily Clark." And in that instant, Ryan's entire world shifted. Ryan stood frozen, his heart beating in a way that felt foreign. It had been over 6 years since he last saw Lily Clark, and now her name was spoken by a little girl with her voice and his eyes. His first instinct was disbelief, to convince himself it was coincidence, but deep down, he knew the truth had already begun to settle in his bones. These weren't just any children. They were hers. And if they were hers, there was a very real chance they were also his. He called his driver, told him to meet them at the front of the store, and gently asked the children to come with him. He expected resistance, hesitation, maybe even fear, but instead the twins simply stood, holding each other's hands. They followed him without question. It was the kind of quiet obedience that came not from trust, but from exhaustion and experience. They weren't used to people caring. That realization hit him harder than anything else. On the ride to the hospital, Ryan sat in the back seat with the children beside him, each still clutching the small snack he had given them. They didn't speak. He tried not to overwhelm them with questions, but he needed to know. He asked their names. The girl replied softly, Emily. The boy followed with, Alex. He nodded, repeating their names in his head, feeling how naturally they settled into his thoughts. At the hospital, Ryan insisted on speaking to the attending physician. The receptionist hesitated, but one flash of his ID and a few firm words were enough. Soon, he was escorted to a quiet hallway outside an ICU room, where a doctor met him with a clipboard and a tired expression. Ryan introduced himself, explained that the children had come to him alone, and asked to know Lily's condition. The doctor sighed. She came in late last night with internal bleeding. Emergency surgery. She's stable now, but unconscious. We don't know how long until she wakes up. There were no emergency contacts. Just a handwritten note left in her bag asking staff to make sure the kids were safe. No one else has come for them. Ryan looked through the glass window. There she was. Pale, motionless, her chest rising and falling with the help of machines. Her face was thinner, her hair longer, but it was her. Every part of him ached just seeing her like that. And guilt, so long buried beneath success and distraction, surged up like a wave. He turned to the doctor. I'll take care of the children. They're not safe alone. The doctor gave him a long look. Are you family? Ryan hesitated, then said quietly, I might be. He wasn't sure what legal rights he had, but he didn't care. He wasn't leaving them, not after everything. He asked for access to Lily's records, made calls to lawyers, and arranged for a private nurse to stay with her around the clock. Within an hour, he had temporary guardianship forms in motion and the children were seated in a quiet room with warm food and a new blanket each. Emily sat close to her brother, but her eyes never left Ryan. He caught her looking at him with a kind of cautious hope, the kind that comes from a child who wants to believe they're not alone but isn't ready to trust it yet. That evening, he brought them to his home. The penthouse had never seen children before. Its polished stone floors and sleek glass furniture weren't made for bare feet or small hands, but none of that mattered. The twins wandered through the space with wide eyes, too quiet, too still. He gave them his guest rooms, called in staff to find pajamas and toothbrushes, and sat with them as they finished eating their second dinner of the day. When bedtime came, they didn't ask for stories or nightlights. They just curled up together in one bed and watched him silently until he turned off the light. Ryan stood in the doorway long after they had fallen asleep. He didn't know what was happening yet, what this would mean. But he knew one thing as surely as he had ever known anything in business, his life had changed forever the moment he saw those children. And no matter what came next, he wouldn't walk away. Not again. The next morning brought a strange and quiet kind of stillness. Ryan awoke before dawn, as he always did, but this time, the silence felt different. It wasn't the familiar emptiness of his penthouse or the predictable hum of the city below. It was the silence of uncertainty, of new responsibility, of two small sleeping forms down the hall who were now, inexplicably, part of his world. He sat at the edge of his bed, looking out over the city skyline, and tried to piece together the enormity of what had just begun. Less than 24 hours earlier, he had been a man in total control of his life. And now, 2 children were asleep in his home, children who might be his, and a woman he once loved lay unconscious in a hospital, holding on to life with the help of machines. He got dressed without his usual rhythm. No meetings to prepare for, no suit and tie today. Just jeans and a shirt, the kind he used to wear before his life became press releases and conferences. He walked into the kitchen and asked his housekeeper to prepare something simple: toast, fruit, warm milk, unsure what children actually ate. When he stepped into the hallway, he paused by the guest bedroom door. It was open slightly, and he saw them there, still asleep, curled up together like 2 halves of the same heart. Their faces were peaceful but too still, as if even sleep didn't offer them full comfort. Eventually, Emily stirred. She blinked up at him with sleepy eyes, then nudged her brother. Alex opened his eyes and sat up slowly, looking around as if he'd forgotten where he was for a second. Then he saw Ryan and gave the smallest nod, like an acknowledgement that he remembered, that it was okay he was still there. Ryan helped them wash up, showed them where their new clothes were waiting, and brought them to the kitchen, where breakfast had been laid out. They ate quietly, politely, with the kind of restraint no 6-year-old should have. They said thank you for everything. They didn't complain or fidget or act out. And it broke something in Ryan, because it meant they were used to being ignored, to surviving on their own. He didn't ask them too many questions. He didn't want to push them, not yet. But when he asked if they wanted to visit their mom today, both of them nodded, not with excitement but with the seriousness of children who understood more than they should. At the hospital, the nurses greeted them warmly. The children walked quietly to the window of Lily's room and stood there for a long time. Emily finally pressed her palm against the glass. Alex stood close beside her. Ryan watched from behind, hands in his pockets, heart heavy with the image of them looking at a mother who had given them everything, even when she had nothing left. The doctor met him outside and gave him a brief update. Lily was stable but still unconscious. They were monitoring brain activity, hopeful but cautious. Ryan asked if he could sit with her, and the doctor agreed. He stepped inside and sat in the chair next to her bed. Her face was pale, her body thinner than he remembered, but she still looked like herself. Strong. Beautiful. Unyielding. He reached out and gently took her hand, speaking softly even though he didn't know if she could hear him. He told her the children were safe, that they were with him, that he would not leave them or her again. He told her about their morning, about Emily's careful smile and Alex's quiet courage. He told her he was scared, that he didn't know what he was doing, but that he was trying. He stayed for over an hour, only leaving when the children grew tired. On the ride home, they were quieter than before. Emily fell asleep on his shoulder, and Alex leaned against the window, blinking slowly. When they got back to the penthouse, Ryan tucked them in again, this time with a blanket each and a small lamp glowing softly in the corner of the room. As he sat alone in the living room later that night, he opened his laptop and began a new file. Not a report. Not a strategy memo. But a letter. A letter to Lily. He wrote to her as if she were reading over his shoulder. He wrote about everything he had missed, everything he regretted, everything he wanted to make right. And when he finished, he saved it with her name, then closed the screen and stared out the window, wondering if she would ever read it. The 4th day began with questions Ryan wasn't sure he could answer. The twins were growing more comfortable in his home. They had begun to explore, testing which cabinet doors opened, which floors creaked, and which windows gave the best view of the sky. Emily had taken to drawing with a quiet intensity, filling page after page with scenes of people holding hands, houses with big front doors, and hearts with little cracks stitched together. Alex was quieter, more reserved, but he had started to follow Ryan from room to room, never asking for anything, just watching him with silent curiosity. That morning, while Ryan was helping Alex tie his shoes, Emily walked in holding her drawing pad. She stood in front of him, eyes serious, and asked, "Are you our dad?" The question didn't come with fear or accusation. It came with the gentle need for truth, the kind only a child could express so directly. Ryan paused, looking into her eyes, so much like Lily's, and answered in the only honest way he could. "I don't know for sure yet. But I think I am." Emily didn't say anything for a moment. Then she handed him the drawing she had made. It showed a tall man holding hands with a girl and a boy. They were standing in front of a building with lots of windows. Above their heads was written in crooked letters, "Our Dad." Later that day, Ryan met with the hospital's legal advisor and began the process of establishing temporary guardianship. Though the staff knew he had been taking care of the twins, he needed to formalize it. He answered questions about his history with Lily, about his income, his home, his willingness to take full responsibility. He didn't flinch. He wasn't doing this out of guilt. He was doing it because it was the only thing that felt right. Before leaving the hospital, he sat once more by Lily's bedside. Her condition hadn't changed. Machines continued their quiet rhythm, keeping her body stable while her mind remained locked away. Ryan took her hand again. This time, he spoke less. He just sat there, letting the silence speak for him. In that room, surrounded by beeping monitors and the scent of antiseptic, he felt something shift inside him. It wasn't fear anymore. It was resolve. He left the hospital and took the twins to a small bookstore on the way home. He wanted them to have books of their own, stories that might distract, inspire, or just help them sleep better. Emily picked out fairy tales and a coloring book. Alex chose a book about stars. When they got home, they read together on the couch. Ryan didn't remember the last time he'd read out loud to anyone, but the way the twins leaned against him told him it didn't matter how well he read, only that he was there. That night, after the twins had gone to bed, Ryan found himself staring at the necklace Emily always wore. It was unmistakable. Half a silver heart, worn from time, the edges dulled by years of being touched and held. He walked to his room, opened a small wooden box in his dresser, and took out something he hadn't looked at in years. His own half. The other piece. He hadn't realized he still had it until that moment. He placed the two halves side by side on his desk. They fit perfectly. He sat down and picked up the letter he had started writing to Lily. He added a new paragraph, one he hadn't expected to write. He told her about the drawing. About the question. About how he had never imagined himself as someone's father, but how, for the first time in his life, it felt like the only title that meant something. He ended the letter not with a signature, but with a quiet promise. "I'll stay," he wrote. "I'll stay until you wake up, and long after that too." The days that followed brought a strange kind of rhythm that Ryan had never known. He had spent most of his adult life in boardrooms, in first-class lounges, in conversations driven by numbers and outcomes. But now, his days were measured in storytime minutes, grilled cheese attempts, and the way Emily laughed when Alex made up silly songs. The twins no longer walked quietly through the penthouse like visitors. They began to leave traces of themselves, stickers on the walls of their room, shoes left by the front door, crayon drawings taped to the fridge. Ryan didn't mind the mess. In fact, every time he stepped over a stray toy, it reminded him that the space was no longer just his. And he liked that more than he could say. He scheduled a paternity test. Part of him already knew what the answer would be, but he needed confirmation, not for himself, but to protect the children legally. The hospital had put pressure on him to formalize his role in the twins' lives, and he didn't want them to be taken away by some distant bureaucracy just because he hesitated to file the right documents. The test was simple, and the results came back in 3 days, 99.9% probability. He was their father. Ryan sat alone in his office when he read the results. He didn't react at first. He just stared at the report, letting it sink into every part of his being. Not a possibility. Not a maybe. A fact. He was their father, and had been for 6 years without even knowing it. That night, he didn't tell them. Not yet. He needed to speak to Lily first, to look her in the eyes and tell her everything, what he knew now, what he felt, what he planned to do. But she still hadn't woken up. She remained in her quiet coma, held between two worlds, while their children waited just outside. Ryan continued his daily visits. The nurses had stopped questioning him. They simply nodded when he arrived and gave him the same updates, which had become routine. Her condition was stable. Her vitals were strong. Her brain activity had moments of fluctuation. They used words like hopeful and cautious. But Ryan had begun to believe in something beyond statistics. He brought the twins in once every other day. They would sit beside her bed, small and solemn, and hold her hand. Emily talked to her sometimes, about the pictures she drew or how Alex spilled orange juice at breakfast. Alex mostly stayed silent but watched her carefully, his hand never letting go of hers until it was time to leave. Ryan never rushed them. He let them stay as long as they needed. He watched them speak into the silence, hoping it would reach their mother somewhere deep inside. One afternoon, as he sat beside Lily and read aloud from one of Emily's favorite books, something happened. Her fingers moved. It was a small twitch, barely noticeable, but he saw it. He froze, looked at the machines, nothing had changed, but then he saw it again. A flutter of her eyelids. A flicker in her expression. He stood quickly, called the nurse, and within minutes the room was full of staff checking vitals, whispering updates, adjusting equipment. Ryan stepped back, his heart pounding, unable to take his eyes off her. It wasn't a miracle yet, but it was a sign. And for the first time since she had arrived at the hospital, the doctors no longer said, if she wakes. They said, when. Later that night, he sat in the twins' room, watching them sleep. He had turned off the lights, but the hallway glow spilled in softly. Emily had one arm around her stuffed bunny. Alex had kicked his blanket halfway off and was snoring lightly. Ryan leaned against the doorway and thought about everything he had almost missed. If he hadn't gone to that store. If he hadn't looked at them. If he hadn't seen the necklace. 1,000 tiny choices, leading to this moment. He felt a weight in his chest, not fear, not guilt, but something deeper. A sense of responsibility not out of obligation, but out of love. A love he hadn't expected. A love that had grown in quiet, steady layers each day he chose to stay. He walked to his bedroom, opened the drawer where he kept the 2 necklace halves, and placed them together again on the nightstand. They still fit, just as perfectly as the day he had given them to her. Tomorrow, he would tell the twins the truth. And he would wait for Lily to wake, not just to explain, but to begin again. The morning after the flicker of movement, everything felt more fragile and more hopeful at once. Ryan had barely slept. He kept replaying the moment over and over, Lily's hand twitching, her eyelids fluttering, the way the machines hadn't changed but the atmosphere in the room had. The doctors still urged caution, but there was something different in their tone now, a quiet energy in their voices that hadn't been there before. Hope was no longer hypothetical. It had form. It had weight. Ryan got the twins ready without needing to check a schedule. They were becoming more comfortable with the routines now, brushing their teeth with the stools he had added to the bathrooms, picking their favorite clothes from the drawers that now belonged to them. Emily insisted on wearing her butterfly hair clip, and Alex packed his drawing of a rocket ship in case he could show it to Lily. Ryan didn't question it. He simply helped them zip up their coats and brought them to the hospital. When they entered Lily's room, it was quiet again. The nurse smiled at the children and said they could sit by her side as usual, but she motioned to Ryan that the doctors had seen more activity in her brain scans overnight. They were encouraged. Emily immediately began talking to her mother, describing the pancakes Ryan had tried to make that morning, which turned out funny but good. Alex climbed into the chair beside the bed and held Lily's hand without speaking. Ryan sat across from them and just watched. A few minutes later, Lily stirred. It was small at first, just a deep inhale, a shift in her fingers, but then her eyes fluttered open. Slowly, unfocused at first, blinking against the light. The room stilled. The nurse stepped back, giving space, and Ryan stood, not daring to breathe too loudly. Emily leaned closer. "Mommy?" Lily blinked again. Her eyes moved toward the sound of her daughter's voice, and then toward Ryan. For a moment, everything in the room seemed suspended in time. She tried to speak, but her voice was a whisper. The nurse quickly brought water, and after a few small sips, Lily turned her gaze back to Ryan and said, "You came." Her words were fragile, but filled with disbelief and something deeper, relief, perhaps, or confusion that melted quickly into something closer to trust. Ryan stepped forward and nodded, not trusting himself to speak just yet. He looked down at the children, both now clinging to her hands, and then back at Lily. "I'm here," he finally said. "I've been here. With them. Every day." Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't cry. She looked at her children, then back at him, as if trying to reconcile the image of the man she once knew with the one standing in front of her now. "Why?" she whispered. "After all this time?" He sat beside her, close but careful not to overwhelm her, and spoke quietly. "Because I saw them in a grocery store. Hungry. Alone. And Emily was wearing the necklace." He paused, emotion catching in his throat. "You kept it. After everything. And when I saw it, I just knew." Lily listened, her fingers slowly tightening around the children's. "They told me you left. That you didn't want family." "I didn't back then," he admitted. "Or I thought I didn't. I was wrong. I spent years chasing all the wrong things. But the moment I saw them, I knew I'd give up everything to keep them safe. And to keep you safe." She looked down at the twins again, who were now quietly leaning into her, as if afraid she might disappear again. "They've missed me," she said softly. "They've had you in their hearts every second," Ryan replied. "But they've also needed you here. And now they have both." Lily closed her eyes for a moment, resting, but with a small, visible smile on her lips. "Are you going to stay?" she asked, barely audible. Ryan didn't hesitate. "Yes. Not just for now. For good." She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. Her hand reached slowly toward the chain around Emily's neck, and she touched the half-heart pendant gently. Ryan reached into his coat pocket and opened his palm to reveal the other half. Lily stared at it for a long time, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she nodded. The nurse returned to check her vitals and suggested the children rest. Ryan walked them out, but before leaving, Emily turned back and ran to Lily, whispering, "I told you he was our hero." Back at the penthouse that evening, the world felt brighter. Ryan didn't realize how much he had been holding his breath until that moment. He made dinner, burned again, but no one cared. They laughed. They talked. They sat around the table like a real family. And when the twins fell asleep, he stood in the hallway outside their room and closed his eyes, letting the weight of the day settle in. Lily was awake. The children were safe. He had stayed. And everything was finally beginning. The days that followed Lily's awakening unfolded with a quiet sense of awe. She was still weak, needing rest and gentle rehabilitation, but her eyes were alert now, her hands warm, and her voice gradually gaining strength. Ryan was there for every milestone, every nod, every whispered word, every slow movement as she sat up in bed for the first time. The twins visited daily, and with each visit, Lily seemed to fight harder. Her children's presence was medicine no machine could replicate. They would read to her, show her their drawings, and whisper things into her ear as if speaking to her soul directly. Emily always brought the silver necklace and placed it in her hand, while Alex stayed close, often just watching her breathe, needing the reassurance that she was truly still here. Ryan found himself balancing a life he never thought he'd live. Each day was split between the hospital and home. At work, he had delegated nearly everything, stepping away from daily operations. His board didn't understand at first, but he didn't feel the need to justify it anymore. His focus had narrowed down to what actually mattered. Morning routines with two curious kids. Afternoons at Lily's bedside. Evenings spent trying and failing to make edible dinners. Nights spent writing in the journal he still kept for her, now with the knowledge that someday, she'd read every page. Lily and Ryan spoke often now. At first it was short exchanges, updates on the children, things she had missed, but slowly, cautiously, they began to circle around the heavier truths. One day, when the twins were at school and the hospital room was quiet, she looked at him and asked directly, "Why didn't you ever come back?" Her voice didn't carry accusation. Just an ache to finally understand. Ryan looked down at his hands and answered honestly. "Because I thought I had to become someone else first. Someone worthy of everything we had. I convinced myself you were better off without me, that I was protecting you. And when I realized I wasn't, it was already too late. Or at least I thought it was." Lily studied his face for a long time. "You could have asked," she said. "I might have forgiven you." He nodded slowly. "I know that now. But I was a coward. And I've spent every day since trying to be the kind of man I should have been back then." There was a long silence, but it didn't feel empty. Lily looked out the window, watching the sunlight stream in, then turned back to him. "They love you," she said. "So much. I can see it in the way they look at you." "I love them too," he said. "I didn't know I could love like this. But they've changed me. You've changed me. And I don't want to go back to who I was." That night, Lily was transferred to a rehabilitation center where she could recover more comfortably. Ryan took the twins to see her and helped them hang drawings and cards in her new room. They brought stuffed animals and their favorite books. When they left, Lily kissed their foreheads and looked at Ryan with a softness he hadn't seen in years. "I don't know what happens next," she told him before he walked out the door. "But I want to find out together." It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a promise wrapped in certainty. It was something more valuable, the willingness to try again. Ryan smiled and nodded. "So do I." Back at home, he sat with the twins at the dining table while they made a list of things they wanted to do when Mommy came home. Go to the zoo. Bake a cake. Watch movies with all the lights off. Build a blanket fort big enough for all four of them. Ryan added one of his own. Have a picnic in the park. The twins cheered. It was a silly list. A simple list. But in that moment, it felt more important than anything he had ever signed in a boardroom. The future was still uncertain. But for the first time, it didn't scare him. Because whatever came next, he wasn't facing it alone. A month after Lily was discharged from the hospital, the home felt entirely different. It wasn't just the addition of her presence that changed the air, it was everything. The way laughter had started to fill the spaces between rooms, the way shoes gathered by the door in mismatched pairs, the way crayons and building blocks had taken over the living room floor. It no longer resembled a penthouse built for silence and solitude. It looked lived in, loved in, reshaped into something that resembled a life. Ryan had adapted faster than he expected. He wasn't just present, he was involved. He woke the twins for school, helped pack their lunches, learned how to braid Emily's hair after 5 failed attempts, and sat on the floor with Alex to build impossible towers out of Legos. He even started enjoying the chaos. Not because he'd grown used to it, but because it reminded him of how empty his life had been before. Lily was healing more every day. She had her energy back, little by little, and her smile came more easily now. She had moved into the guest bedroom at first, cautious not to rush anything. But the distance between her and Ryan had steadily closed, not just physically but emotionally. They shared mornings with coffee in their hands and quiet talks while the kids played in the background. Sometimes they sat together in silence, and even that felt meaningful. There was nothing forced about their connection now. It had been broken once, yes, but not destroyed. What they were building now wasn't a return to the past. It was something new, more grounded, more earned. One sunny afternoon, they finally took that picnic the twins had written on their list. They packed peanut butter sandwiches, juice boxes, and cut up fruit in plastic containers. It wasn't fancy, but it was perfect. They went to a small park with a wide grassy hill and a view of the river. Lily brought a blanket, Ryan brought the food, and the kids brought enough energy to fill the whole space. Emily picked flowers and made a tiny crown for her mother. Alex tried to catch a squirrel and declared himself a squirrel whisperer when it came within 5 feet of him. Ryan watched all of it from where he sat beside Lily, leaning back on one arm with a smile that didn't feel like the kind he used to fake at press events. It was soft and real and rooted in something deeper than success. At one point, Emily ran over and asked Lily to tell them a story. She nodded, and both children flopped onto the blanket, eyes wide. Lily glanced at Ryan and then began to speak, not from a book, but from memory. She told the story of how she once loved a man who didn't know how to stay. How she thought she had lost him. But then he returned, changed, not with promises but with presence. And how, in the end, love wasn't about who left, it was about who came back and stayed. The kids didn't understand every detail, but they felt the heart of it. When she finished, Alex leaned over and hugged her, and Emily looked at Ryan with bright, knowing eyes. That evening, back at home, after dinner and baths and one too many rounds of hide-and-seek, Ryan stepped out onto the balcony while Lily tucked the kids into bed. The sky was turning gold and violet, the city humming softly in the distance. He stared out at it, thinking of how his life had shifted from glass towers and corner offices to something far more fragile and far more valuable. A hand slid into his. Lily joined him, barefoot and tired, but smiling. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Ryan turned to her, kissed the top of her head, and whispered, "I never thought this would be mine." She looked at him and replied, "That's because you never knew what you deserved." He nodded, heart full, eyes stinging a little with the weight of what they had survived. And as they stood together in the quiet, surrounded by a world they had slowly and painfully rebuilt, he understood that this was the true ending. Not the one where everything was perfect, but the one where they had finally become whole. Not because life had given them an easy road, but because they had walked the hardest parts together. And now, they weren't just a family in name. They were a family in every way that mattered. What makes the ending of this story truly powerful is its quiet, emotional honesty. It doesn't rely on grand gestures or fairy tale perfection. Instead, it closes with something more meaningful, a man who once chose ambition over love, learning, through pain and grace, how to stay. Ryan's transformation is not sudden but earned, and that makes it real. He doesn't become a savior, he becomes present. The final scenes, filled with laughter, small joys, and quiet moments of connection, show that healing doesn't always come through dramatic events but through consistency, vulnerability, and choosing to show up every single day. This is not a story about redemption for the sake of appearances. It's about rebuilding trust, not just with others but with oneself. The children, the woman he lost, and the life he thought he didn't need all become part of a greater truth, that wholeness isn't about perfection, it's about love that endures, forgives, and grows. The ending leaves us with hope, not because everything is easy, but because everything finally feels true.